Welcome to the debate. Imagine sitting in a really high stakes negotiation, but instead of talking directly to the person across the table, making eye contact, reading their body language, you have to wait for a translator in a soundproof booth to relay every single word.
It is exhausting just thinking about it.
Right? You hear the proposal, you wait for the translation into your native language, you formulate your brilliant response in your head, you send it back to the booth, and you wait again for them to translate it outward.
Yeah, you would lose absolutely everything that makes human communication effective. I mean, you lose the rhythm, the subtle nuance, the split-second timing of a joke or a rebuttal.
Exactly.
The whole interaction would feel incredibly rigid and, well, completely unnatural.
And that exhausting, lagged process is the exact cognitive bottleneck that millions of language learners experience every single day. They know the vocabulary, they understand the complex grammar rules, but when it is actually time to open their mouths and speak, the mind it goes completely blank because they are running everything through that internal translation booth.
Mm-hmm.
So today, we are examining a fascinating and frankly controversial approach to mastering fluency. The strategy? You completely dismantle that internal translator by forcing your brain to think directly in English or, whatever your target language is.
Right. And the central tension we are exploring today is how this approach suggests you actually do that. It advocates deliberately cultivating an inner voice by using highly simplified vocabulary and here is the real sticking point, actively ignoring your own grammatical errors just to keep the thoughts flowing.
Genuine path to fluency, or is it a very dangerous shortcut? Like, does accepting a messy, broken inner monologue liberate the speaker's mind, or does it risk fossilizing those mistakes and permanently limiting adult learners to superficial communication?
It is a great question, and I will be taking the position that bypassing mental translation through these simple daily internal monologues, even if they are flawed, is the essential catalyst. It is the only way to build the confidence and the cognitive processing speed necessary to achieve true fluency.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I argue that prioritizing speed and rudimentary communication over accuracy, specifically by accepting broken grammar in your own inner voice, compromises true mastery. It basically risks trapping the learner in a state of permanent linguistic simplification.
All right, well, let's dive into the mechanics of this. I want to start by looking at what is actually happening during that blank mind phenomenon. When a learner freezes up, it is not a lack of knowledge. It is an overload of working memory.
Oh, definitely.
Think of your brain's working memory like the RAM on your computer. When you are mentally translating, you are running a massive, heavy application that eats up about, 90% of your brain's RAM. You are simultaneously comprehending the concept, retrieving the native word, and then cross-referencing it to find the English equivalent.
Right. The cognitive load is undeniably massive.
Exactly. Because all your RAM is being used just to find the words, there is zero processing power left for personality, for humor, for tone, or for confidence.
Sure.
So the proposed fix is highly mechanical. You bypass the cross-referencing phase entirely to free up your RAM. And you do this by starting with incredibly basic observations. You look around the room and think to yourself, this is my bed, or, my phone is on the table.
Which feels a bit basic, doesn't it?
It feels basic, almost too basic, but by forcing the brain to bypass translation for these simple items, learners are literally rewiring their neural pathways to connect the concept, the physical bed, directly to the English word, skipping the native language altogether.
Okay, I see where you're going.
The logic is a straight line. Reducing translation increases your processing speed. Increased speed builds psychological confidence. And freeing up that RAM is what unlocks the fluency the learner technically already possesses.
I hear what you are saying about the RAM, and I certainly acknowledge the sheer frustration of that translation bottleneck. But I fundamentally challenge the hierarchy of values being presented here.
How so?
Specifically, the idea that communication, no matter how flawed, is always more important than perfection. Let's look at what this approach actually permits, and even encourages in everyday practice. It suggests that if a learner thinks to themselves, Yesterday, I go to market. That is perfectly fine.
Well, it gets the point across.
But it tells them to rely heavily on circumlocution, meaning if you forget the word for umbrella, just think, the thing I use when it rains. I am sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Deliberately practicing incorrect or oversimplified English internally actively undermines the very definition of language mastery.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Why does it undermine mastery if it gets you speaking? I mean, if I say, yesterday I go to market, you still know exactly what I mean. The communication happened.
Because you are prioritizing mere survival communication over actual acquisition. You are settling for getting a point across by any means necessary. If your inner voice is grammatically broken, your outward speech will eventually be grammatically broken. It is a direct pipeline.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective, because we have to look at how we learn anything from scratch. The strategy here is explicitly mimicking how children learn. Children do not start with advanced vocabulary or perfect tense agreement.
Right.
They begin with what is immediate. They interact with what they see, what they feel, and what they do in that exact second. So generating simple thoughts like, I'm exhausted today, or I'm brushing my teeth, is powerful precisely because it is personal and immediate. It builds a daily habit.
But adults aren't children.
Let me finish the thought. Think of it like learning to ride a bike. You absolutely must establish forward momentum before you can perfect your balance and your steering. The forward momentum is the unbroken chain of English thought. The steering is the complex grammar.
Okay, I'm following the bike analogy.
If you sit on the bike and try to balance perfectly without pedaling, you fall over. The translation booth is the equivalent of stopping the bike every 3 feet to check if your tires are perfectly aligned. You never get anywhere. Doesn't turning thoughts into a simple, messy conversation with yourself functionally break the anxiety of speaking?
Well, it might break the anxiety in the short term, but your bike analogy ignores the fundamental cognitive difference between a toddler and a grown adult. I reject the child analogy for adult learners because it completely ignores adult psychology.
How does it ignore it?
Adults already possess an incredibly complex, nuanced internal world. We don't just think about brushing our teeth. We think about abstract concepts, professional obligations, deep emotional subtleties. There is a massive psychological friction here. An adult's identity is deeply tied to their intelligence and their ability to express nuance.
That is true. It is incredibly frustrating to feel like a child again when you are a competent adult.
Right. So when an approach advises that if you don't know a word, you should just use easier words, like the rain thing workaround instead of umbrella, it is asking a complex adult to regress.
I wouldn't call it regression.
Imagine a 40-year-old engineer having to reduce their complex internal monologue to, the machine is big, the tea is hot. It strips them of their personality, and more importantly, it creates a false sense of fluency.
A false sense?
Yes, it is a fluency based entirely on avoidance rather than acquisition. If you only ever think about things you already know how to say simply, you are never pushing the boundary of your knowledge. You aren't actually learning the word umbrella. You're just getting really good at hiding the fact that you don't know it.
But avoidance of the native language is exactly the point in this initial stage. I am not saying you will never learn the word for umbrella. I am saying that in the heat of the moment, when you are generating a thought, stopping to access your native language mental dictionary shatters the immersion.
I suppose it does break the flow.
Exactly. If you use the workaround, the thing I use when it rains, your brain has successfully remained functionally operating in English. You navigated a roadblock without retreating to the safety of your mother tongue. That is an enormous victory for an adult learner.
I come at it from a different way. If we are relying on avoidance and simplicity to get by, we really need to examine how accuracy is actually supposed to be achieved over time. And this is where I see a glaring contradiction.
What contradiction?
The premise is that accuracy will naturally improve with practice. But simultaneously, we are told that repeating, yesterday I go to market, in your head is a productive exercise. I have a major problem with this mechanism. Practicing an error in your head every single day does not magically turn into accuracy. It fossilizes the error.
Okay, explain fossilization for the listener because that's a pretty heavy term.
Absolutely. In neuroscience, there is a process called myelination. When you repeat a thought or an action, your brain builds a fatty substance called myelin around the neural pathway. Think of it like paving a dirt road with asphalt.
Okay, paving a road.
Right. The more you drive on it, the thicker the asphalt gets and the faster the cars can travel. But if you pave over a crooked, winding dirt road, you now have a permanent, crooked highway. It is incredibly difficult to tear up thick asphalt and rebuild the road straight.
I see.
If I go to a driving range and practice a terrible golf swing for 10 minutes every day, I don't magically become a master golfer just because I'm consistent. I just make my terrible golf swing permanent and automatic. How can internalizing and myelinating yesterday I go to market possibly lead to mastery?
Okay, the golf swing is a great point, but I think we are looking at the inner voice in the wrong way here. You are looking at the inner voice as a final product, a finished road. This approach frames it as a transitional cognitive space. We have to separate the generation of thought from the editing of speech.
Wait, how can you separate them? They are happening in the exact same brain.
Because the singular goal of the inner voice, at least initially, is just to remove the native language crutch. Linguists talk about something called the affective filter. Let's ELI 5 that, explain like I'm 5. It is basically your brain's anxiety wall.
Yes, the affective filter.
Right. When you are terrified of making a mental mistake, that anxiety wall goes up and learning gets entirely blocked. You constantly monitor and edit your thoughts before they even form. That editing process requires enormous cognitive load. It eats up all the RAM we talked about earlier.
Sure, I agree. Anxiety blocks learning.
So why are mistakes part of the process? Because the sheer volume of daily repetition is what lowers the anxiety wall. Thinking in English while walking, cooking, driving. This massive volume gradually acclimates the brain to the rhythm and the cadence of the language.
But again, if they are acclimating to a broken rhythm, they are building a bad habit.
Not necessarily, because accuracy improves with practice, not because repeating "I go to market" magically teaches you the past tense. It improves because once the flow of English is established and the anxiety wall drops, your brain finally has the free cognitive bandwidth, the RAM, to notice and absorb correct grammar from the world around you later. You can't notice the correct grammar if 100% of your brain is just panicking about finding a word.
Well, you are assuming they will organically notice and absorb those corrections once the anxiety drops. Linguistic fossilization is incredibly stubborn. Let's use a different analogy. Building this inner voice is like clearing a path in a dense jungle with a machete.
Okay, I like a good jungle analogy.
At first, it is messy, you are hacking away at vines, and you are just trying to survive and get to the other side, which is getting your point across.
Right, survival communication.
Yes. But if you keep walking that exact same messy, winding path every single day because it feels safe and fast, it turns into a permanent trench. You never look for a better route. You cannot separate the generation of thought from the quality of the thought. If you construct your mental foundation out of flawed logic, your outward communication is always going to be structurally compromised.
I am just not convinced by that line of reasoning because you are analyzing the inner voice in a total vacuum. You are acting as if the learner is just locked in a dark room generating broken English forever.
Well,
But that is not how this works. There are highly structured external tools that run parallel to this internal generation. Things like listening exercises, reading, journaling. Let's bring in the external tools because this is how the brain actually self-corrects.
Okay, I'm listening.
The most powerful tool recommended alongside the inner voice is shadowing. Shadowing is when you listen to a native speaker say a sentence, for example, "I'm looking forward to the weekend," and you repeat it immediately out loud.
Right, vocal imitation.
You copy the pronunciation, the rhythm, the intonation over and over until it feels entirely natural in your mouth. Then you take that exact perfect phrase and deliberately use it in your internal monologue. This proves we aren't just talking about uncorrected mental rambling.
But
It is a holistic system. The internal generation creates the psychological habit of staying in English, but these external exercises inject the grammatical accuracy into the inner voice.
but do you see the profound irony there?
What irony?
I entirely agree that exercises like shadowing are highly effective. Or taking a reading passage like, Tom went to the store because he needed milk, and summarizing it in your head as, he went shopping for milk. Those are brilliant exercises.
Exactly.
But they are effective precisely because they rely on external perfection. They anchor the learner to a native standard. They do not rely on a learner looking around a room and generating flawed sentences from scratch. The shadowing exercise works because you are mimicking excellence, not survival.
But they work together.
I'd argue they contradict each other. This suggests to me that the advice to look around your room and accept yesterday I go to market is actually the weakest, most dangerous part of the entire philosophy.
Oh, come on.
No, seriously. True fluency comes from that rigorous imitation and external anchoring. It comes from the shadowing. It does not come from solitary, uncorrected mental rambling where you call an umbrella a rain thing.
Wait, no. They don't contradict each other at all. They are two halves of the same bridge. Without the mental rambling to clear the path, the external anchoring has nowhere to take root.
How so?
If a learner is still trapped in the translation booth, still using their native language to process every thought, shadowing is just mindless parroting. It is a party trick.
Parroting?
Yes. They might be able to repeat, "I'm looking forward to the weekend" with perfect pronunciation. But the moment they sit down at a real dinner table and try to generate an original thought, they freeze. They immediately revert to the translation booth because they never practice generating original concepts in English.
But generating original concepts doesn't mean we should accept grammatical failure as the baseline.
It does in the beginning. The daily exercises describing the room, narrating your breakfast, even if it is clunky, these are what prime the brain to actually receive the external models. It builds the scaffolding. If you visualize a scene at a coffee shop and internally practice, "Hi, can I get a coffee, please?" you are preparing the brain for real-world execution. The philosophy is asking us to let go of our paralyzing obsession with perfection so we can actually engage in the messy human act of communication.
I understand the desire to reduce the anxiety of speaking. Believe me, I do. But we have to be incredibly careful about redefining what fluency actually means just to suit the lowest common denominator of comfort.
That's a bit unfair.
Well, the prevailing logic here is the less you translate, the faster you speak. The faster you speak, the more confident you become, and confidence is the key to fluency. I submit that confidence without competence is just loud incompetence.
Ouch. That is harsh.
It's the reality of language acquisition. If you are confidently chaining together grammatical errors and relying on simplistic workarounds because you've convinced yourself that getting the point across is enough, you will inevitably hit a plateau.
A plateau, sure, but
Yes, you will be able to order a coffee. You will be able to tell someone your bag is on the chair, but you will struggle to negotiate a business contract. You will struggle to debate a complex political topic or express deep emotional nuance to a partner. You are essentially trading the temporary, solvable frustration of the translation booth for a permanent ceiling on your linguistic capability.
I think we are looking at the exact same timeline of language learning, but we are fundamentally disagreeing on where it ends. To summarize my position, I keep coming back to this one undeniable truth. If you don't build that inner voice, even a messy one, you are forever trapped in that translation booth.
Right.
Establishing an English inner voice, despite its initial simplicity and grammatical imperfections, is an absolute non-negotiable necessity. It is the only way to break the bottleneck that paralyzes so many learners. By starting with basic observations and accepting the messy reality of how the brain adapts to new information, learners build vital momentum. They free up their working memory. They build confidence. And it is that momentum that keeps them in the game long enough to eventually absorb the correct grammar and allow the words to flow naturally.
And to summarize my perspective, while I completely agree that bypassing the translation booth is a worthy and necessary goal, the roadmap of accepting internal errors is perilous.
Perilous.
Yes, its heavy reliance on oversimplified thoughts, avoidance tactics, and a dangerous tolerance for myelinating grammatical mistakes risks permanently stunting a learner's development. True mastery requires precision. Practicing errors internally is a fast track to fossilization, paving a crooked road that limits the adult learner's ability to communicate with the nuance and complexity they actually possess.
It is a tough balance. Though I will say, we certainly find convergence on the undeniable value of consistency. The idea that even 5 to 10 minutes of daily practice, especially the active exercises we discuss, like shadowing native speakers and summarizing reading material, is incredibly effective for rewiring the brain. We both agree that frequent, low-stakes engagement with the language is scientifically sound.
We do. Consistency is absolutely vital. Where we remain deeply divided is on the quality of that internal practice. You see the acceptance of a messy inner voice as a necessary, temporary machete cutting through the jungle. I see it as digging a permanent trench that undermines the very fluency it promises to build.
It is a fascinating tension, and it really invites us to step back and question the very definition of language mastery. What is the ultimate goal here? Is fluency ultimately about flawless textbook accuracy where every verb tense is perfectly aligned? Or is it about the confident, uninterrupted flow of ideas from one human being to another, even if it is a little rough around the edges?
It leaves us wondering if the goal is to be a perfect linguistic machine or a functional, expressive human communicator.
We will leave that for you, the listener, to decide as you explore your own language learning journey. Next time you find yourself stuck searching for a word mid-sentence, ask yourself, are you communicating or are you just waiting for the translator in the booth?